Today on the Coaches Y podcast, we have a very special guest. He was a distance runner in high school. He then took those talents to the next level competing at Wittenberg University. He then returned home to help coach the Ann Arbor Athletic Club. He then found himself as the assistant coach at Alderson Broaddus University in West Virginia. He is now the head cross-country coach at Adrian College. Today, we welcome Miles Caine to the Coaches Y podcast.
With the world of coaching evolving and the carousel always changing, we're going to sit down with some coaches and we're going to figure out what they coach, how they coach, and most importantly, why they got into this profession. My name is Casey Wilkinson, and I am your host of the Coaches Y podcast.
That was my Coaches Y.
Welcome back to another Coaches Y podcast. Today we have a very special guest. We have Coach Miles coming all the way from the East Coast, right, or Michigan, excuse me, from Adrian College, the head cross-country coach. How are you doing today, sir?
Good, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, man. I definitely appreciate you jumping on here today. What's the weather like up there in good old Michigan?
You know, it's actually not bad. Sometimes around this time of year, it can be either really nice, like it is now, or pretty terrible. And so, yeah, we've been pretty fortunate this year with the weather. But yeah, it's great cross country weather, like 60s.
Okay.
Not rainy. So yeah, pretty great.
I appreciate you explaining a little bit about the Michigan weather and what to expect there. And before we dive into your coaching journey, I usually like to talk a little bit about you as the person, kind of talk a little bit about actually what I'll do is I'm going to pass the baton to you, if you would. No pun intended when it comes to this track and field stuff and cross country. But I like you to dive into who you are, like where you're from, where you grew up, and kind of when you got involved in the sport of running in general.
Yeah, so I grew up in Ypsilanti, Michigan, it's pretty close to Adrian. Got grandparents in Adrian, but it's near Ann Arbor, so close to University of Michigan. And yeah, grew up there. It's a great place to grow up. A lot of good running out there. For me, myself, the way I got into running was my dad was a runner and my mom was a national level high jumper.
Oh, wow.
Which you wouldn't guess looking at me because I'm a relatively shorter guy. But yeah, and so I kind of grew up with running in the family, and I really wanted nothing to do about it. I wanted soccer. I wanted, other sports. But then in middle school, basically what had happened was my friend, he got put in a different hall or whatever. And so, I wasn't going to see him. His mom had signed him up for cross country because she was like, you need to go do something. And so I was like, hey, I'll just go do that and we'll just hang out together. And that's what happened. And I wasn't good at all. I mean, I would walk. it was a walk club for a while. And, as you get older, you get a little more serious about it and you get more interested. And it's just kind of how that goes.
Yeah. I vividly remember the first time middle school we had to do, middle school, you have the PE and you have to go run a mile. At least we had to run a mile in middle school. And yeah, let's just say I was not a runner, and I found out pretty quick that wasn't going to be my thing, at least long distance wise. And so I give anybody who's long distance running props, in the track, even in track, you're running a 400, I give you props. So anything more than 400 meters, I'm probably going to be checked out in, right? Obviously I did for wrestling and the sports I did, and you had to run far. So I wasn't like, I did it. I'm just saying, like, I couldn't do it for fun. Like I couldn't go do it for, for X amount of time. Right. And who knows, maybe one day I'll decide like, hey, maybe let's go run a 5K, right? Or let's go try to compete. And who knows, one day you might. But I guess long story short, I couldn't dive into it. I've asked another cross country track coach before this question, and have you, whenever you're running, have you experienced that runner's high? I mean, what is that like when you actually get to that point of actually, getting to that point? I mean, what does it feel like? Is it like euphoria? Is it like you get kind of like another gear, if you would? I mean, what is that?
So it's basically like a low grade flow state, which I'm assuming you're familiar with. And so
Correct. Yeah.
yeah, everything just kind of like settles in and you feel relaxed, and it's a really good feeling.
Yeah.
I think what often keeps people from finding that is they usually they'll try to run too far or too fast.
I
Usually
see.
it's too fast, right? If you're just getting into it, I would say 30 minutes at like what you feel is an easy pace. Don't even bring the watch, don't bring the phone, leave that stuff all at home. Um, yeah, just an easy 30 minutes. If you have to walk in there sometimes, that's fine. But just move for 30 minutes and you'll probably feel some of
You'll
that
get
flow
to
right
that
there.
point.
Yeah.
And is that something whenever you're training your athletes? And this might be a question for like if we were to get you on for another episode to kind of dive into, but is that something that like you can train for? I mean, I know you said like you're obviously training X amount of times a week or maybe every day, right? And you're running, you have your volumes of running, right? Probably one day's more than another or whatever. But is that something that you can train for? Is like to purposely get to that stage and then like try to prolong that as long as you can, type of thing?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily like that's not necessarily the goal that we have. Um, but the more you run, the easier it's going to be to get into the flow state. And something that I find helps is having like a kind of a pre-run ritual that gets you in the mindset
Mm,
to be in the flow state, right?
right.
And so for me, if I do a couple of my PT exercises, maybe I start with my headphones in, takes 10, 15 minutes or whatever. And then I take them out as I get closer to the run. Like that kind of helps get the mind into it. And usually the run is a little bit better that way. Some days you just have, I mean, if you're training hard, a third of your runs are gonna suck. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
that's just
fair.
the reality. But yeah, if you can get yourself in that state of mind, then training is
You'll
really
be all
fun.
right. Yeah, I had that one time. As you were explaining that, I remember there one time in high school we had a running. Actually, a few times in college, but definitely in the morning in high school, I do remember that we had X amount of time of running, and there was just one day I just got in my zone and I ran the entire time and kept that pace, and I didn't feel. I mean, I was tired at the end, but I wasn't breathing hard. I didn't slow my pace. I didn't speed up my pace, but it was definitely a pace. I was passing people that normally are lapping me, So I definitely, thinking back as you're explaining this, I've definitely experienced that for sure. So I mean, I know you said you grew up kind of around running and that's just kind of what your life was growing up. Did you have the opportunity to participate or like run at the next level? Like, did you run in college, collegiately?
Yeah, so I went from high school and I ran at Wittenberg University, which is another smaller school in Ohio that has, I mean, just amazing facilities and a fantastic coaching staff. And yeah, it was there like, I would say that I struggled there. Um, Went from being like the top dude at like a pretty mediocre to bad high school
Okay.
to like now I'm top seven in at that time mediocre to bad program.
I see.
And so like it was hard, but yeah, I mean the coaching staff there was phenomenal, and I did eventually find like the love for running again during that time.
Right. And as you developed in that sport, like in high school, and whenever you were in high school, right? Obviously, there was a point where you probably realized you could go to the next level. When did you realize that you could go, run it in college? And what was your recruiting process like? Was there a lot of schools coming to talk to you? Was it one and done type of thing? I mean, when did you know you could, and then what was the actual process like?
Oh yeah. So for me, I always knew I could run in college, and I always knew that that was something that I wanted to do because my dad had run in college, and he was not that much better than me. His PRs are better, but like if he can do it, I
Yeah,
can,
yeah.
right?
You're right. I
And so
got
I
you. Yeah.
always knew, yeah, I always knew I could go run in college, and then the recruiting process was me reaching out to coaches, coaches reaching out to me, going on. I mean, my dad and my mom were phenomenal, and I'm very fortunate that I got the opportunity. But they took me all around to do overnights with different coaches and see the team. Which in my recruiting process for us, like at least getting in for lunch with the team is probably the biggest part because there were a couple of schools where I loved the team, didn't really vibe with the coach, or loved the coach, didn't really vibe with the team. And so you got to kind of find a place where both of those match up. And I was fortunate enough to where my parents took me around and got to have those experiences. And eventually Wittenberg ended up being the place.
Be in the place, yeah. Um, and just I'll be honest, I haven't actually heard of Wittenberg. What level is that? Is that D3, D2? Is that NAI? What is that?
It's D3. Yep.
Is it D3? Okay. So whenever you are, I guess, kind of to correlate whenever you were at that school and, you know, kind of how your process went, how similar is it now that you're the head coach of something to what you went through? I mean, as you're recruiting kids, I mean, are you kind of looking at, and that's the thing, right? Like, I know in like team sports, if you would, football, baseball, basketball, even potentially wrestling, a lot of it is like visually looking at an athlete and kind of just saying, can this guy compete at this level versus, and like swimming, track, cross country, you can look at PRs. And I know it may or may not affect like where they are regionally, right? Somebody running at like 5,000 feet versus running at sea level might be a different, obviously it's kind of different, but I mean, are you looking for, how are you going about your recruiting process? Are you looking for PRs? Are you looking for, are you looking for physical whenever you actually see somebody? I mean, what is your process like as the coach, finding these kids? Is it a PR thing? Is it a physical thing? What is it for you?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of everything, right? And so our head track coach, he's phenomenal, recruiting wise. Basically, what he does for us is he puts together big old spreadsheet of everybody, and I think this year we set the bar at maybe 22:20 for a women's 5K, and we set the bar for maybe 18:30, 18:20 5K for the men or boys, sorry.
Right.
And he compiled lists of everybody in the state of Michigan, every high schoolers, every senior who has run that time or faster. And then we go through that and we try to get in contact with them. And it's a long process and it takes a lot of man hours.
Right.
But and then from there, like once we establish contact, then we go through kind of that recruiting process.
Right.
And so for me, what that looks like is a phone call. So typically it's like, hey, are you interested? Yeah, cool. Let's have a phone call. We have a phone call. And really on that phone call, I'm trying to figure out kind of like what kind of attitude the person has, number one.
Right.
What kind of work ethic they have, number two. And number three, like obviously how interested. And so to be honest with you, like we've had a couple kids who are really quite fast, who are pretty interested. And, maybe we get done with the visit or we get done with the phone call and we're just like, man, that kid is like not somebody who we want on the team. Like they seem like, they seem like a lot. I don't know if that's the type of people that we want to bring in on campus. And unfortunately, we have to be like, hey, listen, these are the things, we talk to them about it. We're not just going to be like, yeah, no, we're good. We don't need you.
Of course. Right.
but we'll talk to him about it. Be like, hey man, like, listen, when you said this, um, this didn't really vibe with us because, you should respect your teammates and X, Y, Z. And, if you're putting, I had one guy last year who, when they were talking about conference, he was like, yeah, I'm working hard. Nobody else on the team is working, blah, 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 blah. Dude was like fourth on his team. And so
So
even if that is true, like, is that
yeah,
something you really want to be
you want to
sharing? Like,
right.
so that
It
was
didn't
kind of
seem
a
like it
red
was
flag.
yeah, for sure. Just the way that he went up, just how he said it or what he said kind of threw up a caution flag for you for sure.
Right. And then we test out a coaching moment, right? We try to be like, hey, XYZ. And if he responds well to it, awesome. Like, then yeah, no, we'll keep him on our recruiting list. If he
Right.
responds poorly to it, then unfortunately the recruiting journey with us is over.
Probably over. Right. So
So yeah, it's all about attitude.
I know that you were mentioning like the track coach, and it sounds like you guys work hand in hand, right? Obviously, your cross country people are running track season. How much do you? I mean, are you around during track season as well, or are you kind of like pass that off to your
Oh,
track coach?
oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, you're around as
Yeah.
well. Okay, I kind of figured you were, but I just didn't know. Being that I know that he kind of did it. Now, are you guys? Like I said, probably for another episode, but I might as well ask it now. What are you guys doing like recruiting wise? I know you said Michigan, but are you guys looking outside of Michigan as well? Like, do you guys look nationally for certain people, or do you guys like have a pipeline states outside of just home state?
Yeah, absolutely. So primarily we recruit in Michigan. However, we also recruit a lot outside. So a lot of Midwest. We got a couple kids from Texas this past year. I got a couple folks from Florida on the team right now. And then I actually have a young lady from Nevada visiting this Friday. So we do look around, but it's going to be a lot easier to recruit somebody from around the area
Of course,
who, you can sit, you can go to their meets and all this, and there's no shortage of talent in the Ann Arbor area. So
for sure. So yeah, no, I definitely appreciate you diving into that a little bit. And to be honest with you, that might have been more. I might have had more of a dive in with you than anybody else. So I definitely appreciate you explaining how your process goes. And so kind of now, or what I'd like to ask you now is about like a coach who impacted your life. So the question is was there ever a coach who made an impact on your life? And it could be one, it could be however many you mentioned, but kind of explain a coach who he or she was and what kind of impact they did, kind of like your why behind, why they made that impact.
yeah, so I've had a number of coaches. Most have been really phenomenal. I mean, just really, really phenomenal. Um, and I would say like the biggest one, the biggest two. We're gonna go three. I'm gonna mention the third. Just a quick
Okay.
shout out.
Yeah.
But my first cross country coach, Miss Gazelle from Lincoln Middle School,
Okay.
she's like the second mom. She was out over at the house the other week. Um, but I mean, like just the way she like it.
Cool. So technical difficulties, guys. I do apologize there. Don't know what happened to my computer. But coach, you were in the middle of talking. I know you're in the middle of talking about Miss Gazelle. I don't know if you had a chance to get to the next coach, but you feel free to resume where you were. I do apologize about that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, last thing about Ms. Gazelle, like I said, just making sure people feel appreciated, loved, and valued, which is huge. And then the next coach is my dad. And he coached me when I was in high school. And I mean, first of all, like technical knowledge of the sport was very high. He was fortunate enough to be coached by a former Olympian, and actually coached with that former Olympian. And so technical knowledge is really high. And what I was most struck by him was the blend of kind of like technical knowledge as well as like kind of coaching as an art form, right?
Okay.
Knowing when to push people, how far you could push people, and in what way to push people, right?
Right.
And my dad is the master of a quick word, right? If you're on the line or you're getting ready to go to the line and it's a big race and he sees you're nervous, he is I don't know if he'd like me sharing the story, but I'm gonna do it anyway.
No, you're good. Yeah. I'm all for
He's
stories,
famous
man.
he's famous for coming over, kind of grabbing you and being like, hey, this is a big pressure event, whatever. It's just another race. But like, what I need you to do is in your head, just say, and I'm not going to say the word, but F it. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And my dad does not cuss ever. And so like that always had a really big impact when he did have those one-on-one quick moments with you. And, so I learned a lot from him about empathy, how to push, where to push. And now that didn't stop me from coming home to mom and being like, oh gosh, dad's getting on my nerves. And it didn't stop him either from coming home 20 minutes later or so and go, gosh, your son's getting on my nerves.
Yeah.
But yeah, looking back, he's a phenomenal coach, and I was really fortunate to work with him. And then the last person, which is a quick shout out, is Coach Paris at Wittenberg. This guy, he's the sprint coach, so he no technical ability in terms of like coaching me. Right. He helped me out with hurdles sometimes because I was a steeplechaser. But
okay.
But yeah, just in terms of like, we talk attitude, we talk professionalism, we talk hard truths. Like this is your guy. So where my first two coaches were kind of not wishy-washy by any means, but I'm trying to think of a less or a more suitable word than that, but kind of in that direction of, all right, you need this, I'm going to provide this, yada, yada, yada. Coach Paris provided a lot of like heavy hitting structure that I think I needed before I was going to become a coach.
Right.
And kind of just a phenomenal coach. Phenomenal.
Well, shout out to those coaches. It sounds like they did their, they did their work on you, and it sounds like they made that impact in your life to help you get to where you're at, and as you're a coach. And that kind of leads to the next question. Is I know that you said that they made the impact on you, right, and they helped you get to where you're at. So kind of to help, like I said, kind of be that trampoline or that middle question is, how long have you wanted to coach? When did you decide that coaching is what you wanted to do? I shouldn't say let's start with just when did you decide that coaching is kind of what the profession you wanted to go into?
I decided I wanted to be a coach as soon as I realized that I was not going to be a professional runner, which was 8th grade.
Okay.
And so in 8th grade I was like, man, like it would be really cool to be a professional runner. Like that's the goal some days. And, I was looking, and I was a decent 8th grader. I mean, being a decent 8th grader means absolutely nothing, but when you're in 8th grade, it means something. And of course, even then I was looking around and I was like, I'm not going to be it. Like I'm not genetically, I didn't choose my parents well enough to be a professional runner.
I love that. That's
and
funny. Okay.
So as soon as I realized that, I was like, you know what though? I can be a world-class coach though.
Yeah.
And so at 8th grade, that's what I knew I wanted to do. And the thing is, you can be a world-class coach as a high school coach, you can be a world-class coach as a middle school coach, you can at whatever level, you could be a world-class coach coaching 80-year-olds on track.
Of course.
And so we
I think that's and that is, I'm glad that you mentioned that, simply because that's kind of the reason why I have this podcast is, and I've mentioned it before in some solo episodes I've done, but also talking is you know, every coach and has their gems, right? Every coach has their why, but every coach has their reasons. But also, I think that we can learn from every coach. We don't have to just listen to it. And it's not to say I don't want to have Nick Saban on here, or Bill Self, or Bill Belichick, right? But for the 98% of the coaches who are not at the high level D1 or professional, I think that I would love to learn from you guys, right? And that's it might be a selfish thing, but I love to learn from my peers, right? And even if I'm not in the same sport, right? Coaching, I would consider coaches as a colleague of any sport. So, I 100% agree that you can be a world class coach and be in middle school or in high school, and you have something to give, not only for maybe other coaches to listen to, but obviously why you're doing it is for your kids and your athletes, for them to then be in a better position at the next, whatever that next level might be, right? Middle school to high school, or even, collegiately to international, whatever, right? It's a big piece of why kids get to the level they are. It's obviously their coach, and being there for the kids, but doing everything you can do to be the best coach possible is how you become a world-class coach, right? Sometimes you can be, right, you might not be, as you mentioned, like the most technical coach in whatever sport you're doing, but like you can be the best motivator. You know how to get a kid to run through a brick wall for you, right? And that might be all you need to get a kid to be out on whatever, on the field, on the pitch, on the mat, in the pool, or, I don't know what you call cornhole. I know that you guys have cornhole up at your school, right? Whatever you call that.
We do.
I saw that. I was looking on there. I was like, how the cornhole? That's crazy. But yeah, whatever sport it is, right? Like there's so many ways that you can be a world-class coach that doesn't have to come down to just like the technical aspect. I know that the kids are searching for that, and you should probably have a little bit of that, but there's so many ways that being a world-class coach, getting that title, there's so many avenues to get to that point, right? So I appreciate you kind of jumping into that and saying that, because I think that's an important piece in coaching for sure, and not thinking that just because you're not coaching, the New York Yankees doesn't mean that you're not a top tier baseball coach or whatever, right? How long have you been coaching? I know we talked pre-episode, you're a little bit younger than me, so it probably couldn't be coaching for a whole lot of time, but how long have you been coaching, and what was your timeline like? So like, where did you start, and how did you get to Adrian?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say, like, I was a very injured athlete. And so, in my opinion, injured athletes make good coaches, because you got to spend a lot of more time figuring out, like, what's going to work, what's going to not. And so that, I would say, like, my coaching journey started as soon as I started getting injured, and started to, like, have to do a little bit of my own research here and there, and absorb a little bit more knowledge than maybe some of my peers might have had to.
Right.
But yeah, right out of college, I started coaching a little bit of high school, helping my dad out here and there with Lincoln High School. And then I worked kind of here and there with some club coaching. I worked in a gym, like a very kind of bougie, you lift weights gym, and making sure people are okay. They're not going to hurt themselves or anything.
Yep.
And then from there, I got a job at Alderson Broadus, which is actually it was a D2 school out in West Virginia, and that was my first coaching job. And I got out there, I was an assistant, and I was really handed the reins to this group of, I think there were really only 2 true distance runners in there. Everybody else was like 400 runners, 800 runners, right. And had to do cross country with them, which, if you don't know, that's a big difference. That's 800 meters versus 8,000 meters.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, handed the reins there by Paris Vaughn, who a different Paris than my old coach, but also phenomenal coach. And yeah, he trusted me enough to do what I needed to do, and I learned a lot there. Made a lot of mistakes. Made a ton of mistakes, and the group I had there was very high maintenance as well. So it was like a crash course on what to do, what not to do, and what the penalties are if you do something stupid, like maybe not set expectations at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. Fair. Fair.
And so, yeah, that, and then decided I couldn't live in West Virginia anymore just for money and family.
Okay.
Yeah, so I interviewed for the Adrian job, and to be honest, I knew they were hiring either a head coach or an assistant coach or both. And so I interviewed for, honestly, I didn't know which one I was interviewing for until I got there. And then I got there and they said it was the head coach one. I was like, oh, okay. Well, might not get it, but it's good to interview. And lo and behold, I ended up getting it and came in. And turns out that the assistant coach is actually a guy who I used to run against in high school.
Okay.
At a different school. And and so and I tell you what, he's been phenomenal to coach with. He brings a lot. I tend to overthink things, especially with training. So specific training, sometimes I make things a little too complicated. And he tells me what I need to hear when I need to hear it. He's like, hey, like, we don't really need to do this that way. We can just make this simple and do it this way. And so, and then I'm like, oh yeah, we can. I was doing too much with that.
Right.
The kids would hate that. And so he's a good rock for me to have. So I've been coaching
important piece.
It is. Yeah.
So you were helping with your dad, and then you went to your you said it was Albert, right? Or how do we pronounce that word? Or the one
you can just say AB. AB is fine.
Okay, I was gonna say. Yeah. I feel like yeah. Okay, so then you went to AB, and now you got to hear after that time, and so as you transition into from helping in high school to now being a head coach at a college program, is there anything that you? I guess the best way to say it is, what do you love about, either the progress that you've seen within the coach, your coaching experience, or just coaching in general? What do you love about it, and is there anything that you dislike about being a coach, either in general or as the head coach?
Well, when I first started, I hated recruiting. Just because it is, that's really your 9 to 5 job. If we're being honest, to some degree, recruiting is your 9 to 5 job. And then coaching, you get to do as well. And so you got to do the recruiting to get good people in and to get, people who are going to nourish your program. Right. And so at first did not like it. I probably didn't like it because I was pretty bad at it, to be honest with you. Right. And last year was all about getting better at it. And this year, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm a great recruiter. I think I'm an okay. I do an
better.
Okay job.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's always going to be something that I work to improve on, just like with coaching. Right. So that is not my favorite thing in the world. And then, but yeah, outside of that, kind of the paperwork stuff. I've listened to some of your other episodes, and that seems to be a common saying.
Yeah. It is common.
We all just want to work with the kids and do the fun stuff, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I really love it all. I've come to really love the recruiting. I've come to really love you always love working with the kids, but even when you have those really tough, you got to be a good coach, not necessarily a nice coach all the time.
Right.
And sometimes those moments can be really challenging, especially for me. I tend to be a people pleaser. And I got to constantly remind myself, that's not going to help these kids grow. Right. It's not going to help me grow as a coach either. So, but yeah, I love it all. It's fantastic.
Good. Yeah. It sounds like it's just every day get a little bit better and just try to, as you said, just try to make each season or each recruit you talk to a little bit better, you know, and I take that. I try to do that in my life, but yeah, as a coach too, you know, I would overthink as well, and my coaches definitely try to keep me sane when it came to that, and I was the same way. Administration was a lot of it too for me, and every coach I've talked to this season, you know, for the most part, it's been the administration stuff, buses, all that stuff. So it sounds like that's just a common thing, but we all work through it because we love to do it. You know, we love the coaching side of things, and that's why we're in it, right? It's for the other stuff, not just the administration stuff's probably the worst part about it for sure. So I know that you kind of, well, not kind of, I know you've been relatively new to the head coaching game of you know, collegiately, and I guess maybe in general. But when it comes to, I know you think a lot, so this might be a question that you've thought about in your own head, or you've been a part of it. You might have seen it, right, or whatever the case may be. How do you build a successful culture on the level of buy-in and mindset? Right, I know that that's a big deal for you when you're probably recruiting. You've already kind of mentioned you're trying to get an idea of how they react and how they respond to things, right? So it sounds like you already kind of go after character a little bit, and that's the nice thing about recruiting is you can put whoever you want in your culture, or hopefully, right, that they fit when they're actually there. But I guess on general terms, and when you actually look into it, how do you do that? How do you build that program and have kids buy into it?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple different ways, right? So the goal, like if you have the goal in mind, the goal in my mind, is to have a group that honestly, like if I went away for 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, a season, the goal would be to have a group that is self-sufficient and could do everything on their own. They know why we're doing things. They have discipline to do the things. They can motivate each other. They can coach each other. They can coach themselves, right? They can diagnose when things may or may not be wrong. Like I know you do wrestling, and I'm sure wrestling and running, like if you get a specific pain, like your coach probably needs to know about it.
For sure,
And
yeah,
so
absolutely.
being able to differentiate between soreness and being injured, right? All those things that a coach does, my goal is to teach my group how to do it and then have them want to do it and do it at a high level. So that, in my opinion, is the goal. Now, I think there are a couple different ways to get there. The first way, which I've seen a number of coaches do, is you set the standard right away that hey, like this is what we're doing. This is what I need you guys to do, and there's no build-up process to it.
Right.
And to be honest, I think that way can work if you have enough people and the culture's already close enough to that. But I think that really getting to it right away, I think you burn a lot of people who could potentially be really phenomenal to your program. So I kind of take a different approach. I take you ever heard about the toad in the water, where you slowly start to boil the water.
Yep.
And the toad will just stay there. I don't know if that's the right analogy.
Yeah. No, I understand. Yeah, you have a different approach to it. And I guess my question for you is, that was something that whenever I first jumped into the head coaching job, that was the absolute first thing that I tried to set was like, this is expectations, right? We have to set expectations on in the room and out of the room, right? If you're caught fighting, if you're caught doing this, you don't do the things in classroom, right? Blah blah blah. You have this expectation of what you can expect this to happen, and then in the room, this is what we do in the room every day or whatever. To then and then like trips and all this stuff they have expectations, and one thing that I learned and actually had, and I've said it multiple times before, so I'm not necessarily going to dive into it all the way, but I've had to discipline my two best athletes back-to-back weeks, to where they either didn't get to go, actually they didn't get to go to some big tournaments because of that, and one of the things was like you have to treat your quote unquote weakest link or worst kid in the room, right? The bottom of, or the first year C team kid, the same way you have to treat your 10-year kid who's been on varsity since he's been an eighth grader or whatever, right? You have to treat your best kid the same way as you treat your worst kid, and so that's something that I always learned. So do you think that like what and not to like debate your way, but have you seen success in the way that you're doing it versus like what you mentioned and what I'm mentioning, or like the other way is like the standard right away and potentially
Yeah,
learning, like
yeah,
you said?
yeah. And I want to clarify, like we do set expectations. So the way we do expectations are, every year at the beginning of the year, we sit in as a team, so a men's team and then a women's team, different separate meetings, and we go over. Coach Liam and I, we go over like our expectations for the team, and it's the basic stuff, right? It's grades, it's being on time to practice, it's this and that. It's like the real basic stuff. Okay. And so, yeah, no, we certainly set expectations. However, we also open it up to them to decide on rules, values, and expectations that
I
they
see.
have.
Yeah.
And so, in that way, we kind of set because for running, I see my athletes an hour, maybe 2 hours a day, with 2 days off, right? Where they're doing it on their own.
Right.
And to be honest, I can beat them up in practice as much as I want, but unless they're getting their 8 to 9 hours of sleep, and unless they're eating well and eating enough, unless they are having positive social interactions, taking care, like they are not going to absorb the training. They're not going to absorb what
Right.
we're doing. And so when I say we got to start slow and wind it up, I mean expectations in terms of really, really mostly recovery
Right.
and kind of that drama stuff.
Yeah, I definitely understand. Like there's it's not that you're not having those things set. You're just, I like that. Maybe older ways, right? Maybe they might be saying like the old ways of like this is my way or the highway type of thing. And it's not that you don't have that as your set, but like you want to have them be able to communicate kind of what they're feeling and some of the things that they have to maybe work it into your standards or something for that season, right? Because as you mentioned, they have to want to get up and they have to want to go do it, and as long as it aligns with your vision and your mindset, right? You and your coach are willing to potentially incorporate it.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I think the approach that Liam and I have, uh, yeah, I think it's definitely harder in some ways because it requires a lot of attention. It requires a lot of calling people into the office, and oftentimes, especially early on, it's like, hey, like I heard you say this to so and so, like this is how it came off to me. This is how I heard it. Like, is this what you meant? Like,
Yeah.
like, no, coach, that's not really what I meant. This is what I meant. Okay. So, like, I think you need to communicate this better. And I think you need to go talk to so and so and let them know what you actually meant. Because, like, from the outside looking in,
Yeah.
this is what, and then in the future, like, that process slowly gets ingrained. And then all of a sudden they're checking each other.
Right.
And then as soon as they start checking each other, that's that self-sufficiency.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, someone's out on the weekend when they really shouldn't be,
Yep. Yeah.
they're going to check each other. And that's the
Yeah.
goal.
I've heard that I mean, and I agree. Player led teams, right? I shouldn't say player, but I mean, I guess athlete ran teams are always the best culture, right? And that's you usually find the most success on game day or right or match day or whatever it is, right? Race day for you. So I guess that kind of leads to this question: is how do you build a successful program on wins and like longevity, and how do you sustain it over time?
Yeah. So I haven't been around long enough to answer that question, like probably super fully, right? This is my third year as a college coach. And so for me, it's all about like individual improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that comes in different ways. So for instance, if we have if we have a kid who maybe doesn't get the biggest PR of the season, but we see immense personal growth, like maybe they went through some family stuff or this or that, like
Right.
we can count that as growth. But for us, it's got to be about growth day in, day out,
Yep.
learn from everything.
Yep.
And if you take the time to sit down and think with your thoughts and figure it out,
Yeah.
then you'll do that.
Yeah. And I respect that I respect what you said about how you haven't been doing it long enough to really dive into that question. And so I really respect the hell out of that answer. But I do have a question that you might be able to answer. It's so I know you said, like, this goes way back to the beginning when we were talking about recruiting. Honestly, I just thought about it, but I've talked to a community college coach on here, and his goal is to get kids out of JUCO to get to a 4-year, right? If kids want to go. So being a 4-year school, do you and your track coach, do you guys look into junior college kids when you're doing your recruiting, or are you guys kind of focused on, and I know there's probably a good split, right? Like, you guys are focusing on high school kids because you have 4 years with them, you can develop them how you want, right? Things like that. But are you guys also looking to that 2-year school to consider getting kids out of there if they have, obviously all your criteria when it comes to your recruiting side of things?
Oh yeah, 100%. So actually he might be my third on the team at the moment, but he's second or third, real solid second or third. He actually came from a community college last year. And
Okay.
so, and what happens with that is either the kid gets in touch or the coach gets in touch, and they're like, hey, this is my situation. This is where I'd like to be. Do you think like this would be a good spot? And we talk about it and we think about it, and they come on a visit, but yeah, same kind of process there.
Right. And I've talked to another, I have talked to another 4-year coach, a few of them, and I haven't really jumped into this question as much, especially like last season that you listened to. You probably didn't hear this question, but, the one I talked to earlier on in this season talked about how the transfer portal and NIL and some of those things didn't really affect them as much, being that it was wrestling, right? Wrestling doesn't get all the love as much, and I'm sure cross country, we probably kind of feel the same way in some aspects anyways, with resources or whatever you might look into it. Is that something that you guys, like, is there a transfer portal for cross country kids, and do you like look into that or try to get those kids as well whenever you have the opportunity?
Yeah, 100%. So we look at the transfer portal a fair amount. One of the things with the transfer portal that I think you always need to be wary about is, that person is transferring for a reason. And yeah, unfortunately, I feel that sometimes they bring the reason with them. And so there,
Yo, you
there's
got
a
just so
risk
you
in,
know, just so you know, I love some of your jokes because that's funny as hell. And the one you said earlier about your parents, top tier right there. Sorry, I didn't mean to
I,
interrupt you, but it's comedy.
no, I
I like it.
appreciate it. I appreciate it. Yeah, sometimes they just bring it with them. And so there's an extra level of what I would call like risk involved because they have been a college athlete. They know how things go. And if they have a strong enough opinion, then they could come in and really cause a problem with your
Yeah,
culture because they are
yeah,
older. A freshman comes in, and to be honest with you, like in terms of culture, freshmen are not dangerous.
yeah.
They can be super helpful. They can be a positive influence, but it's kind of hard for them to be a negative influence, at least in my short
For the most part,
experience.
right? Yeah,
But yeah, man, transfer they hold a lot of weight. They're kind of risky, in my opinion. And so if I'm bringing a transfer in, like, you be sure I'm having some real conversations with that person.
right.
And I actually have a transfer on my team right now from St. Leo.
Okay.
guy's name is Jesse, and he is like a jackpot. I mean, everything you would ever want in an athlete. And I mean, in his recruiting process, like we had some very real conversations that I may have not had with some high school. Just because he's older and he's
Right.
been in college, he's phenomenal. I couldn't ask for a better person on the team.
So it's really just kind of comes down to where they came from, and the reason behind it is and like you said, you might have to do a little bit more digging before you even make that decision. So that's fair. Okay. And I appreciate that simply because every sport's different. I know every sport in the NCAA has that opportunity, but it affects others more than it might affect some more than others. Right? Obviously, football is huge, but I know it affects every sport at that level. So it's definitely a question I definitely enjoy, and I'm probably going to ask more for your schools that are in the NCAA just because I think it's important, and I think it's cool to kind of see your mindset on those things. So I am down to the final question for you for the night. I mean, who knows? I might dive in a little bit more off another thought that came back from 20 minutes ago. But the final question, and it's the most important question, and it's the name of the podcast is, why did you choose to come into coaching? What is your why? Why do you coach?
Yeah, because I love it. I just truthfully and honestly, I love helping people get better. And I think in the process of helping people achieve what they want to achieve, I like selfishly, I myself also get a lot better. I get better at communicating. I get, I'm better with empathy, better with making tough decisions that I may not emotionally like, but I know, in your head that it's the right decision. Um, but it's going through like the ups and downs of all your athletes. Cause I mean, as an athlete, there are tons of ups and downs.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
hit these sky high mountains and you hit these super valley lows, and helping people navigate through that is probably the best journey that I could have.
Yeah.
So the moment that I don't love doing that anymore is the moment I'll quit and go get like a regular, sit in an office
Yeah.
and type on spreadsheets type job. But yeah.
Right. I love that. Um, I think that every person has their why, and and I'm assuming I mean, team sports, right? Like football, baseball, things like that, right? It's a very big collective thing. Everybody has their individual journey, but when it comes to like individual sports, right? Like wrestling, it's a team sport, but individual sport. I mean, you can't win a national championship with one national champ, right? It takes a whole team to get there, in some way or another. So it's very much individual, but it's also very much team. And getting each person to eat, yeah, like you said, each person through each of their valleys or their mountaintops is really rewarding. And I personally love that idea too, right? Like I've had kids, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again right now because I truly enjoy it and I love that. Sometimes the kid needs the program more than the program needs the kid, and I think that goes a long ways. And sometimes that's like just a relationship with the coach, right? Like I grew up without a dad, and I've said that before, and my coaches were like my father figures, right? I have a few different coaches who were that person, and still to this day, I can call them and they'll be that person, and that's because they helped me get through whatever it was, right? On the field, off the field, whatever it was, and obviously real life stuff too, post athletic. So, doing it, and I'm assuming that's their why too. I don't know if I'll ever get them on a show. I've already talked to one, and he didn't know if he wanted to do it, but it's definitely at the end of the day an amazing feeling, right? And so I can appreciate your why, and I can appreciate the reason behind you doing everything. Coach, I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on. I know it's kind of late for you right now. It's dark. I guess it's dark. It gets dark early, anyways. But I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and jump on the podcast today. And I'd really love to have you back, maybe at another time, maybe a little bit slower, but come back and dive into a little bit more like schematics and programming. But in general, I love this episode was really good, and I'd love to have you back on.
I appreciate it. Love being here. Thanks for the invite.
Of course, and I do apologize for the technical difficulties to you as well, and I apologize to you guys who are listening. If you guys are still listening to this point, hope you guys are, because there's a lot of really good gems in there, especially, regardless if you've been coaching for 20 years, or you've been coaching for 3 or 1, everybody can give some gems. So hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. If you guys are on YouTube, make sure you guys hit that bell, like, subscribe, all that stuff. If you guys are on PocketCasts, Spotify, or newly added Apple Podcast, make sure you guys leave a review, hit those stars, whatever you say with your chest, because we would love to hear what you have to say. Coach, again, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. But with that being said, we'll see you guys next episode. Peace.